Walruses seem like fairly innocuous animals, with their pudgy appearance and funny movement on land like with many other related pinnipeds. You would be forgiven for thinking that they are generally fairly chill animals. Unless of course you've seen that one Pingu episode that does in a way foreshadow that walruses are, well, not as seemingly docile as they appear. To gain some additional background on walruses before delving into their less well known and gruesome behaviours and or feeding strategies, and trust me, we'll be getting thoroughly into that, it is worth understanding how they generally operate in their environments and also about how they are physiologically. Walruses mainly live in and around shallow shelf regions of Greenland and around the Arctic regions of Canada, though they do frequently occur around much of the northern hemisphere as well. They are the only remaining species in the family of Odobinidae, which was once much more diverse in the past, and had members like Pontolis, which would have been very formidable predators in their own right, being similar in size to living elephant seals, the largest carnivorans alive today. Living walruses are no slouches though regarding their size, with adult males often weighing in at over 2 tons, only being exceeded by the living 2 species of elephant seals mentioned just before. These sizes are enough for them to be a threat to boats, with a mother walrus defending their calves, sinking a Russian tugboat after perceiving it as a threat, with the crew of the boats managing to escape the sinking by making their way onto a smaller vessel. Being a keystone species in the regions they inhabit, they help to regulate the balance of the ecosystem they live in, filling this role by spending a significant amount of their time hunting for benthic bivalve mollusks. Mainly feeding on clams, walrus have a big impact on the larger benthic community by bioturbating, disturbing the sea floor in where they feed, in where they release nutrients into the water column through the disturbance, which encourages the mixing and movement of many different forms of life, and also increasing the patchiness of the benthos. An adult male can eat up to 6,000 clams in just one day, so given how they often live in social groups, thousands strong, it is easy to think of the impact that they can have on a given area. How they feed on them is especially relevant, especially when it comes to later discussion. When it comes to eating bivalves, walruses employ a method where, instead of shattering them open, instead suck the meat out from them by sealing their powerful lips to the bivalve's shell, and then rapidly and repeatedly withdrawing their piston-like tongue back into their mouth, which creates a powerful vacuum that breaks the shell open, and then allowing them to feed on the meat inside. This is helped by their arched palate, which is uniquely vaulted, which best allows for this effective suction. While indeed helpful in eating bivalves, as is rather commonly known, depicted, and thought of, this method of feeding allows them to be effective predators of even larger animals. Walruses have been seen and known to feed on large vertebrates, ranging from birds to other seals. This is something that isn't necessarily surprising given that eating of other seals or sea lions is fairly common among other large pinnipeds, though how walrus go about their feeding is very distinct from their relatives. If said feedings came from either scavenging, opportunistic behaviour and or aberrant feeding, or active consistent predation had been for a while not too known, though much of this discussion has cleared up in recent years as more data and sightings have been gathered. Voyages around the Arctic as far back as the 1870s have turned up accounts of walruses that after being shot, were found to have stomachs full of large pieces of seal skin, much of which having the blubber still attached after being further examined. Accounts of them also feeding on recently deceased narwhals were also known of, though the walrus had not killed this individual themselves. They've also been seen feeding on dead minke whales and polar bears, though only after they were already dead. In the case of seals though, active predation is something that has indeed been documented, something that can be backed up, both by encountering carcasses after the fact, as well as some very useful direct observations. The remains of 2 spotted seal pups, left behind from a walrus, strongly suggested that the walrus that had just left the scene had killed these individuals rather than eating them after their deaths. The blubber thickness of both pups was comparable to those of healthy seals rather than ones that were starving or otherwise impoverished, with the only injury that was determined to have occurred before one of the pups' deaths was a bruise on their head. This kind of injury is very unusual in seals other than in walruses, in where said bruises occur after they've been struck with a rival's tusks. Walruses using the method of using their tusks to attack other seals was shown to be the case with 2 eyewitness accounts. In the first instance, 2 hunters had shot a bearded seal that was lying at the edge of a floe. As they approached to retrieve the seal, a walrus rose out of the water alongside them, stabbed the seal twice with the tusks, then pulled the seal off into the water and carried it away. Although the seal presumably was already dead, the walrus appeared to have attacked it, as if it was trying to kill it. In the second instance, a group was observing a harp seal pup on the floe in the White Sea. Suddenly, a walrus rose in the water alongside it, stabbed at the pup with its tusks, and then, upon seeing the men, withdrew and swam away. The seal was not killed, but the intent was indeed very clear. Birds have also been known to have been targeted, with birds like spectacled eiderducks overwintering the areas where walruses live were seen to have been caught by them, and after an attack by one, all that remained of them was their bones and feathers. A study examining the food remains in the stomachs of 364 walruses taken in the Bering Straits region from 1952 to 1982 found that 5 of these individuals contained parts of seals, mostly their skin and blubber. What was further interesting was that seal eating was 10 to 100 times more common during the 1970s through 80s, at 0.6 through 3% of cases compared to the previous 3 decades, when numbers were down at about 0.07 through 0.20%. This marked difference seems to be down to the unusually restricted spring ice conditions of the time, especially in 1979, which tended to lead to walruses and other seals coming into contact more. This all indicates that more often than not, walruses are actively going after seals, and that said behaviour is not all that aberrant. There also seems to be 2 types of seal-eating walruses, being the facultative and obligate types, where there is some occasional overlap. The facultative walruses eat other mammals only when their main food of invertebrates is limited or absent in some form, which mainly occurs in the area encompassing the eastern Canadian Arctic, Greenland and Norway. In these regions, walruses often dive to depths that are deeper than where their main food sources often reside, leading to many of them migrating on empty stomachs to look for food elsewhere. Obligate flesh eaters are ones which are mainly solitary bull males that have a far greater tendency to feed on other vertebrates. Also known as rogues, they also have quite a different appearance, being comparatively lean and slender, with their shoulders and forelimbs being very large and powerfully developed. Their chins and necks are also saturated with oil from frequent contact with seal blubber, giving them a more amber colour to these regions and to their tusks, which are also longer and more slender than in other walruses, something likely down to the lack of attrition that normally wears them down in ones that are more so benthic feeders. How walruses go about their feeding on their prey is the most grisly aspect of their predation, and it's certainly not pretty. As mentioned earlier with how walruses use their lips to open up clamshells, their remarkable suction powers also prove to be just as effective in ripping meat off of vertebrates. Based on examinations of carcasses and eyewitness accounts, walruses primarily consume the hides and blubber of seals, the most nutritional parts of them, while leaving much of the skeletal muscle and bone alone. Sucking the meat right off of the bone like a living vacuum cleaner, walruses have been seen to grab seals, one such case being observed in a shared enclosure where an individual ring seal pup was introduced into the same aquarium as a walrus in a zoo. Within minutes of the seal being introduced, the walrus there had grabbed the seal within its flippers, the seal's head against the walrus's powerful mouth, whereby the brains and other flesh was removed from the skull, leaving the head crushed and pulverised, more or less missing. An example of how this looks can be seen here in a separate case, which looks to be a clear walrus kill, given the compression of the head and otherwise intact body. So, to conclude, Pingu in this case really avoided a pretty terrible fate given what walruses in real life are capable of, and all of this goes to show just how formidable these animals actually are. All in all, I thank you for watching this video on these animals and that you may have learned something new. If you would like to see more from this channel, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And with that, I'll see you next time, whenever that may be.